The iron chains rattled against Mira Thorne's wrists as rain began to dot the packed dirt of the crossroads, and the trader's voice rose above the muttering crowd like a crow's warning call. "She comes with a curse," the man shouted, yanking the chain so Mira stumbled forward onto the auction block. Failed crops wherever she treads, livestock dead in the fields, storms that follow her shadow. But look at those arms, strong as an ox despite the bad luck she drags behind her. He grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Price is half what you'd pay for any other orc woman, and you know why." Mira kept her eyes on the horizon where dark clouds rolled in like bruises spreading across green sky. Her tusks ached where they pressed against her lower lip. 3 villages in as many months, each one casting her out when misfortune struck. Coincidence, she told herself. Random chance wearing the mask of fate. But the chains were real enough, and so was the hunger gnawing her belly. The crowd shuffled, boots squelching in mud that smelled of manure and fear. Farmers mostly, their faces weathered and suspicious. A few merchants with calculating eyes. No one stepped forward. "Come now," the trader called. "She can work a full day and half the night, young too, barely 20 winters. Someone needs field hands badly enough to risk it." "Risk is right," a woman muttered. "My cousin bought an orc woman last year. Barn burned down a week later." "That was lightning," someone else said, but without conviction. Mira's fingers curled into fists. The iron bit her wrists. She had been many things before the bad luck started. A shepherd's helper, a quarry worker, a tavern maid for exactly 4 days before the well went dry. Never a slave. The trader had found her sleeping in a ditch outside Milford, half-starved and desperate enough to accept food in exchange for letting him bind her. Stupid. But hunger made people stupid. Thunder cracked overhead. The crowd flinched. "See," the trader laughed nervously. "Storm's coming. She brings the weather with her, folks say. Now who'll take her off my hands? 50 silver, and that's robbery at this price." Silence answered him. Rain fell harder now, cold drops that soaked through Mira's thin shift and plastered her black hair to her skull. She was shivering, though she tried to hide it. Orcs were supposed to be tough, unbending. If she showed weakness here in front of these humans who already thought her cursed, she would never stop falling. A man pushed through the crowd. He was tall but not unusually so, perhaps 6 feet, with shoulders broadened by labor and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. Dark hair shot through with premature gray. Eyes the color of winter rivers, cold and deep. Scars marked his forearms where his sleeves were rolled back, and his hands were calloused in the way that spoke of endless work. He wore homespun wool and boots that had been mended more than once. He stopped in front of the auction block and looked up at Mira. Really looked, not at her chains or her tusks or the green of her skin, but at her eyes. Something passed between them in that moment, some recognition that had no name. "She comes with a curse," the trader said again, eager now that he had interest. "Just so you know, friend. I'm obligated to tell you, bad fortune follows her like a shadow." The man did not break eye contact with Mira. "So do I," he said, his voice rough as gravel. He held out his hand, not to the trader for negotiation. To Mira herself, palm up, an offer rather than a claim. The gesture was so unexpected that she could only stare at it. His hand was scarred across the knuckles, dirt under the nails, but steady, waiting. "You'll take her then?" The trader could barely hide his relief. 50 silver, as I said. 30, the man replied, still watching Mira. "If she's truly cursed, she's worth less than half your asking price. You said so yourself. 40 is my bottom line. 30 or I walk away and you're stuck with her through winter." The trader spat into the mud. "Done, 30 it is. You're a hard man, Gregory Irons, Gregory." The name fit him, Mira thought. something strong and unyielding, forged in fire. He counted out coins from a purse that looked painfully thin, each piece of silver clearly precious. When the trader grabbed for them greedily, Gregory's hand shot out and caught his wrist. "The key to her chains," Gregory said, "not a request." "Oh, right, of course." The trader fumbled with a ring of keys, selected one, and tossed it to Gregory. "Pleasure doing business. You'll want to keep her locked up at night, friend, for your own safety." Gregory caught the key without looking at it. He climbed onto the auction block in 2 easy strides, and the crowd murmured at the boldness of standing so close to a supposedly cursed orc woman. He fit the key into the manacles at Mira's wrists. The locks clicked open and the iron fell away with a clatter that seemed impossibly loud. Mira rubbed her wrists where the metal had chafed the skin raw. "Why?" she asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. "Because I needed help," Gregory said simply. "And you needed not to be in chains." He turned to climb down from the block, then paused and held out his hand again. "Can you walk? Or should I carry you? I can walk." Mira took his hand anyway, because refusing felt like spitting on the only kindness she'd been shown in months. His grip was warm and calloused and careful not to squeeze too hard. He helped her down from the block, and when her legs buckled from hours of standing in one position, he caught her easily around the waist. "Steady," he murmured. "I have you." The crowd parted around them like water around stone. Gregory kept one arm around Mira's waist until she found her balance, then released her but stayed close enough to catch her if she fell again. They walked through the marketplace together, past stalls selling bread and cheese and early apples, past the blacksmith's forge and the cooper's yard. No one spoke to them. No one met their eyes. At the edge of the crossroads stood a wagon hitched to a single tired-looking mule. Gregory helped Mira onto the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. The mule started forward without needing to be told, as if it knew the way home by heart. They rode in silence for a long time. The rain fell steadily now, turning the road to soup. Mira watched the countryside roll past, all of it gray and brown under the storm. Fields lay fallow, their furrows empty. A scarecrow leaned at a drunken angle, its arms spread like a prophet of doom. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "My farm," Gregory said. "About 5 miles north. It's not much, but the roof doesn't leak, mostly." "What do you grow?" "I try to grow wheat and barley, vegetables in the kitchen garden. I keep chickens, or I did until the fox got them." He glanced at her sideways. "The land isn't good anymore, hasn't been for 3 years. That's why I could buy it cheap when I came back from the war." "The war in the Eastern Territories. That's the one." His jaw tightened. "I was a soldier for 8 years. Came home to find my mother dead. My father remarried and moved to the coast, and our old farm sold to pay his debts. So I bought this patch of hard luck and figured we deserved each other." Mira studied his profile. The set of his shoulders spoke of someone carrying weight that had no name. "You said you come with a curse too." "I do." Gregory's voice was flat, matter of fact. "Everyone I love leaves or dies. My mother, my sister, my friends from before the war. 3 men I served with died in my arms. A woman I was going to marry decided she wanted someone who smiled more often. The land I bought, going sour despite everything I do. So when that trader said you were cursed, I figured you and I would understand each other." The honesty of it was like a blow to the chest. Mira had expected many things from the man who bought her, but not this raw truth offered without preamble. "I don't think I'm actually cursed," she said carefully. "I think I've just had bad luck. Maybe." Gregory clicked his tongue at the mule, guiding it around a deep puddle. "Maybe curse is just a word people use for bad luck that lasts too long. Either way, you'll work my farm, I'll feed you and house you, and we'll see if two cursed people together make things better or worse. And if it gets worse, then it gets worse. He shrugged. Can't fall much farther than rock bottom. Despite everything, despite the cold and the rain and the ache in her wrists, Mira felt something almost like hope flicker in her chest. This strange, scarred man with winter in his eyes and honesty on his tongue had bought her freedom with money he clearly could not spare. He spoke of curses and bad luck as if they were weather, something to endure rather than fear. And he had held out his hand to her first before the transaction as if her choice mattered. "What do you want me to call you?" she asked. "Gregory, just Gregory." He looked at her fully for the first time since they left the crossroads. "And you, Mira, Mira Thorne." Mira. He tested the name and something softened in his face. "It's a good name. Better than cursed orc woman, anyway." She surprised herself by laughing. It came out rusty, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years, but it was real. Gregory's mouth quirked at the corner, not quite a smile but close enough to hint that he remembered how. The farm appeared through the rain like something from a melancholy painting. A small house, wood and stone, with shutters that needed painting. A barn that leaned slightly to the left. Fenced fields stretching into the gray distance, empty except for stubborn weeds. A chicken coop with no chickens. A well with a peaked roof, the bucket hanging askew. Gregory stopped the wagon beside the house and hopped down, then reached up to help Mira. She took his hand again, jumping down into mud that splashed up her bare legs. She had no shoes. The trader had taken them weeks ago. "Wait here," Gregory said. He disappeared into the house and emerged a moment later with a pair of boots. "These were my sister's. She was tall like you." "They might fit." Mira took the boots, overwhelmed by the casual generosity. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen how much work needs doing." But his tone was wry rather than cruel. He led her inside while the rain drummed on the roof. The house was simple but clean. One large room with a fireplace, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserves and dried herbs. A curtained alcove in the corner held a bed. Another door led to what looked like a small pantry. The floor was swept, the dishes washed and stacked neatly. Whatever else Gregory Irons might be, he was not a slob. "You can sleep in the loft," Gregory said, pointing to a ladder that led to a platform under the eaves. "There's blankets up there and a mattress stuffed with straw. Not luxury, but better than the rain." Mira climbed the ladder and found exactly what he had described. A narrow space with a sloped ceiling, a mattress that looked freshly stuffed, wool blankets folded at the foot. A small window let in gray light. It was the first space she had been able to call her own in months. She climbed back down to find Gregory building up the fire. "I'll make dinner soon," he said without turning around. "But first, let me show you the farm so you know what you're getting into." They walked the perimeter together, Gregory pointing out the fields and their problems. This one had drainage issues, water pooling in the low corner and drowning anything planted there. That one had thin soil, rocks rising up like bones. The vegetable garden grew more weeds than food. The barn needed half its boards replaced. The well water tasted faintly of sulfur. "I've tried everything," Gregory said as they stood in the middle of the wheat field, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Crop rotation, fertilizer, prayers to gods I don't believe in. Nothing takes. The soil just gets worse every year." Mira knelt and dug her fingers into the earth. It was cold and sour smelling, lacking the rich loam scent of healthy farmland. She brought a handful to her nose and sniffed. "How far upstream is the well?" "The well? It's not upstream, it's right beside the house." "I mean the source of your water. Where does the underground spring come from?" Gregory frowned. "I don't know, never thought about it. Why?" This soil smells wrong, not just depleted but poisoned. If your well water tastes of sulfur, maybe the groundwater itself is tainted." She let the dirt fall through her fingers. "I worked a farm once where the landlord buried old tanning chemicals in the back 40. 2 years later, nothing would grow. The poison had spread through the water table. You think something's poisoning my land? I think it's possible." Mira stood, brushing mud from her hands. "But I need to track the water sources, test the soil in different areas, see if there's a pattern." For the first time since she met him, Gregory looked at her with something like hope. "You know how to do that. I worked a lot of farms before the bad luck started. You pick things up." She met his eyes. "If we can find the source, maybe we can fix it. And maybe pigs will fly." But Gregory's tone had lost its edge. "Still, it's worth trying. Tomorrow, if the rain stops, we'll start mapping the water. Tonight, let's get dry and fed." Dinner was simple. Barley porridge with dried apples, bread that was only slightly stale, and chicory tea that tasted of earth and bitterness. They ate in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Mira had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite, and then she had to force herself to eat slowly, to not wolf down the food like an animal. Gregory noticed but said nothing. He simply cut another slice of bread and set it beside her bowl. Afterward, while Mira washed the dishes in a basin of well water, Gregory sat at the table mending a shirt by lamplight. His stitches were neat and small, the work of someone used to fixing his own things. The domesticity of it was almost jarring. This hard man with his talk of curses and dead friends, sewing a torn sleeve with the patience of a craftsman. "Can I ask you something?" Mira said, drying the last bowl. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Why did you really buy me? You said you needed help, but you could have hired a farmhand. Or gotten someone from the village." Gregory set down his sewing. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire. "Because you looked like I felt," he finally said. "Standing there in chains, shivering, everyone afraid of you for things you couldn't control. I know what that's like. After the war, people looked at me the same way, like I was dangerous, like I might explode if they said the wrong thing. They weren't entirely wrong at first." He picked up his sewing again, fingers moving with practiced ease. "And because you needed someone to take a chance on you. I remember what that feels like too." Mira's throat tightened. She had been ready for many things. Cruelty, indifference, demands she couldn't meet. Not this gruff kindness from a man who spoke of his own brokenness as easily as commenting on the weather. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You already thanked me. I mean it more now." Gregory glanced up at her, and for a heartbeat she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Then he looked away, tying off his thread. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we work." Mira climbed the ladder to her loft. The blankets smelled of lavender and wool, clean and warm. She wrapped herself in them and lay listening to the rain on the roof, the occasional pop of the fire below, the quiet sounds of Gregory banking the coals and settling in for the night. She had been bought by strange men before, in the loose sense of being hired. This was different. This was a man who expected nothing but work, who fed her and housed her and spoke to her like a person. A man who called himself cursed and meant it, who recognized in her the same bone-deep weariness that marked him. Mira fell asleep thinking of his hand held out to her in the rain, palm up, waiting for her choice. She woke to birdsong and the smell of frying bacon. Pale sunlight streamed through the loft window. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the world washed clean. Mira climbed down the ladder to find Gregory at the stove, poking strips of bacon in a cast iron pan. "Morning," he said without turning around. "There's tea in the pot. We'll eat, then start surveying the fields." They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, Mira with a ball of twine and Gregory with stakes carved from scrap wood. They marked out the fields in sections, then tested the soil in each one. Mira showed Gregory how to check the texture, the smell, the way water pooled or drained. Some sections were merely poor. Others were actively poisonous, the dirt almost gray with corruption. "It's worst in the northwest corner," Mira said, crouching beside a patch of earth where nothing grew at all. "And it spreads from here in a rough circle, like something buried is leaching into the ground." Gregory drove a stake into the ground to mark the spot. "There's nothing buried here that I know of. I bought the farm empty." "Who owned it before you?" "A man named Cutler. He died of fever, his wife moved back to her family, and the land went to auction. I was the only bidder." Gregory wiped sweat from his forehead. "No one wanted it because the fields were already failing." "How long between when Cutler died and when you bought it?" "Maybe 6 months." "And how long before that did the crops start failing?" Gregory thought about it. According to the auctioneer, Cutler had 2 bad harvests before he died. "So call it 2 years. Mira stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Then whatever's poisoning the land has been here at least that long, maybe longer." She turned in a slow circle, studying the lay of the ground. The northwest corner sat slightly uphill from the rest of the farm. Water would flow from there, spreading the contamination. "We need to dig." "Dig for what?" "Whatever's killing your farm." They fetched shovels from the barn and began to dig in the northwest corner where the soil was worst. The earth came up gray and foul-smelling, like a wound gone sour. Gregory dug with the steady rhythm of someone who had spent years at hard labor, his shovel biting deep. Mira matched him stroke for stroke, her orc strength serving her well despite months of poor food. An hour in, her shovel struck something that was not earth. A hollow thunk, like hitting wood. "Stop," she said sharply. Gregory froze mid-stroke. Mira knelt and brushed dirt away with her hands, revealing weathered planks. "There's something buried here." They cleared the dirt more carefully now, revealing a wooden hatch about 3 feet square. Iron hinges held it shut, orange with rust. Gregory worked the tip of his shovel under the edge and pried. The hinges groaned but held. He pried again, harder, and the wood splintered. The hatch tore free with a shriek of rusted metal. Beneath it lay a hole perhaps 6 feet deep, lined with stone. And at the bottom, half submerged in oily black water, sat 3 large ceramic jugs. The smell that rose from the hole was nauseating, sulfur and rot and something chemical that burned the back of Mira's throat. Gregory pulled his shirt over his nose. What in all hell's? Tanning chemicals, maybe. Or something from a dye works. Mira peered into the hole, careful not to breathe too deeply. The jugs must have cracked. The poison's been leaching into the groundwater, spreading through the fields. Why would Cutler bury this? Maybe it wasn't Cutler. Maybe whoever owned the farm before him. Or maybe someone paid Cutler to bury it and he thought 6 feet down was good enough. Mira sat back on her heels. Doesn't matter now. What matters is getting it out. They rigged a rope and lowered Gregory into the hole, a rag tied around his face against the fumes. He secured the rope around the first jug and climbed out gasping. Together they hauled it up. The ceramic was cracked along one side, black liquid oozing through. They set it carefully aside and repeated the process twice more. By the time all 3 jugs were out of the ground, Mira's head was pounding from the fumes and Gregory looked green around the gills. They hauled the jugs far from any water source, to a rocky outcrop at the edge of the property, and smashed them with a sledgehammer. The black liquid spilled out, stinking to high heaven, but here it could drain into the stones and evaporate rather than poisoning farmland. "We'll need to clean out that hole," Mira said, coughing. "Fill it with fresh soil. And test the well water to make sure it's not completely fouled." Gregory nodded, still catching his breath. He looked at Mira with something like wonder. "You found it. You actually found what was killing my farm. We don't know if fixing it will help. The damage might be permanent. But we have a chance now. Before, I was just watching everything die and not knowing why." He reached out suddenly and gripped her shoulder, the gesture brief but fierce. "Thank you. We should both stop thanking each other and focus on fixing this." Despite her practical words, Mira felt warmth spread through her chest. They had done this together, found the poison that had been blamed on curses and bad luck. If they could heal the land, maybe they could heal the story people told about both of them. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked like people possessed. They hauled the contaminated soil from the hole and buried it deep in the rocky outcrop where nothing grew anyway. They filled the pit with clean earth and gravel, breaking the pathway between the poison site and the rest of the farm. They dug diversion ditches to route clean rainwater into the fields. They tested the well water daily, and slowly, gradually, the sulfur taste faded. Gregory bought lime from the village and they spread it on the worst fields to neutralize the acid in the soil. They composted kitchen scraps and the mule's manure, mixing it into the garden beds. They worked from dawn until dusk, stopping only to eat and collapse into exhausted sleep. And somewhere in those 2 weeks of shared labor, something shifted between them. It started with small things. Gregory making extra tea and handing Mira a cup without asking if she wanted it. Mira learning to read his moods by the set of his shoulders, knowing when he needed to work in silence and when he needed distraction. They developed a rhythm, working side by side without needing to speak, each anticipating what the other needed. Gregory proved to have a dry sense of humor buried under his gruffness. When Mira accidentally dumped a wheelbarrow load of compost on her own feet, he looked at her with a perfectly straight face and said, "I think that's supposed to go on the garden." She threw a clod of dirt at him, and he almost smiled. Mira told stories while they worked, tales from her childhood in the orc settlements to the east. Stories of her grandmother who could predict rain by the way her bad knee ached. Of her brother who once tried to wrestle a bear and ended up running naked through the forest after it stole his clothes. Gregory listened quietly, sometimes laughing, sometimes just nodding. His face lost some of its hard edges when he laughed. One evening, as they sat on the porch steps watching the sunset, Gregory asked about her family. "My parents died when I was 12, Mira said. "Fever, same winter. My grandmother raised me and my brother until she passed. He joined a mercenary company heading west 5 years ago. I haven't heard from him since. Do you think he's alive?" "I don't know. I hope so." Mira picked at a splinter in the wooden step. "I was working as a shepherd's helper when the bad luck started. A wolf pack took half the flock one night while I was on watch. The shepherd said I must have fallen asleep, but I hadn't. I just didn't see them coming until it was too late. He cast me out without references. And then everything I touched seemed to go wrong, not all at once, but steadily. Animals died, crops failed, accidents happened. People started calling me cursed. I started believing them." She looked at Gregory sidelong. "What about you? You said everyone you loved left or died." Gregory was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. "My mother died giving birth to my younger sister. I was 7. My father blamed the baby, said she cost him his wife. He wasn't cruel exactly, but he was cold. I raised my sister mostly, or we raised each other. Her name was Grace. She died of fever when she was 16. I was already in the army by then, stationed at the Eastern Front. They sent me word 3 weeks after she was buried. I couldn't even come home to say goodbye." His jaw worked. "My father remarried within the year." When I came back from the war, he told me he'd sold our family farm and was moving to the coast with his new wife. Handed me a purse with my share of the sale and said he hoped I'd find happiness. Like it was that simple. Mira didn't reach for him, but she shifted closer, her shoulder nearly touching his. I'm sorry. It's old pain now. But the rawness in Gregory's voice said otherwise. I had friends in the army, brothers really. We swore we'd all come home together. 3 of them died in a skirmish that never even got a name. We were just holding a bridge that didn't matter and they died for it. I held their hands while they bled out, told them lies about how they'd be fine. That wasn't your fault. Maybe not. But I'm still here and they're not. That's the curse, I think. Not that bad things happen to me, but that they happen to everyone around me while I keep surviving. Mira turned to face him fully. In the dying light, his face looked carved from stone, beautiful in its hardness. You saved my life, she said, or at least my freedom. You gave me a place when no one else would. If you're cursed, then your curse has a strange way of showing itself. Gregory met her eyes, and for a moment she saw past the walls he'd built around himself. Maybe you're breaking it, he said quietly. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. Or maybe there was never a curse, just bad luck and people trying to make sense of it. Maybe. He looked away first, but not before she saw the fear in his eyes. Fear of hoping, fear of caring, fear of losing again. They sat in silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars emerged. Mira wanted to take his hand, to tell him he didn't have to be afraid of her leaving. But the words seemed too large, too soon. So she just sat beside him and tried to believe that proximity was its own kind of promise. 3 weeks after they pulled the poison jugs from the ground, the first shoots appeared in the fields. Gregory found them early one morning and called Mira over, his voice tight with disbelief. She ran from the barn where she'd been mucking out the mule's stall, expecting disaster. Instead, Gregory knelt in the northwest field where they'd first dug, pointing at tiny green spears pushing up through dark soil. Wheat, he said. I planted test seed here 4 days ago, not really believing. But look, it's growing. Mira knelt beside him, touching the fragile shoots with a careful finger. They were real, healthy. The soil around them smelled rich and alive, nothing like the sour poison earth they'd hauled away. It's working, she breathed. The land is healing. Gregory made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. He pressed his hands into the earth like he was praying, his head bowed. Mira saw his shoulders shake once, quickly suppressed. She put her hand on his back, feeling the knobs of his spine through his shirt. We did it, she said softly. You and I together. He looked up at her and his eyes were wet. I didn't think it was possible. I thought I was doomed to watch everything die. You're not doomed. You're just a man who had bad luck and kept working anyway. She helped him to his feet. Now we plant the rest of the fields and hope we haven't missed the season entirely. They planted wheat and barley in the larger fields, vegetables in the kitchen garden. Gregory bought seed with money he'd saved for winter, a gamble that would leave them with nothing if the crops failed. But the shoots kept coming, green and strong. The well water ran clear and sweet. The garden exploded with growth, squash and beans climbing their stakes, lettuce and radishes swelling in neat rows. The chickens that Gregory bought from a neighboring farm thrived instead of dying. The mule got fat on good hay and the sweet grass that sprouted along the fence line. Even the barn seemed to stand straighter, as if the poison that had seeped into the land had been leaching the life from the very boards. Word spread through the valley. Travelers on the road could see the green fields where before there had been only stubble and weeds. Neighbors who had avoided Gregory's farm started finding reasons to pass by, curiosity overcoming their superstition. One morning, a farmer named Hugh Carver stopped his cart at the edge of the property. He was an older man, round-bellied and balding with shrewd eyes. Gregory walked out to meet him, Mira at his side. "Heard your fields came back," Carver said without preamble. "Heard the orc woman fixed them." "We fixed them together," Gregory said flatly. "What do you want?" "To see for myself if the curse is broken." Carver climbed down from his cart and walked to the nearest field, kneeling to examine the wheat. It was knee-high now, healthy and golden green. He rubbed a seed head between his fingers, then straightened. "I'll be damned. It's good wheat." "It is," Mira said. She kept her voice neutral, but her hands were fists at her sides. This man was looking at their work, their sweat and risk, and calculating his own advantage. Carver turned to Gregory. "I've got 2 fields on my eastern property that went sour 3 years ago, won't grow more than thistles. You think whatever you did here would work on my land?" Gregory glanced at Mira. She gave a tiny nod. "Maybe," Gregory said. "Depends on what's causing the problem." "I'll pay you to find out. You and the orc woman both. 50 silver if you can fix it." "Her name is Mira," Gregory said coldly. "Right, Mira, 50 silver and you can take your time about it. I've waited 3 years, I can wait a few more weeks." They negotiated terms, Carver agreeable in the way of men who sensed a bargain. When he drove away, Gregory stood with his arms crossed, watching the cart disappear down the road. "We don't have to do it," he said. "I know these people haven't treated you well." "They haven't treated you well either," Mira pointed out. "But if we can help, we should, and we could use the money. The money would get us through winter with some to spare." Gregory looked at her seriously. "But I won't ask you to grovel for people who called you cursed." "I don't grovel." Mira straightened her shoulders. "I fix broken things. That's what I do. If we can prove the curses were never real, maybe we prove something else too." "What's that?" "That people are idiots for believing in them in the first place." Gregory did smile then, a real one that reached his eyes. "You make a good point." They went to Carver's farm the next day and found the same problem. Poison buried in the ground, old dye works jugs that had cracked and leaked into the soil. They dug them out, cleaned the earth, and spread lime. Carver paid them 50 silver and told his neighbors. More requests came. A widow with a dead orchard. A young couple whose vegetable garden grew nothing but weeds. A tavern keeper whose well had gone foul. Gregory and Mira worked through the late summer and into autumn, fixing land that had been given up for dead. Every farm they saved was proof that the curse had been nothing but ignorance and buried poison. People stopped avoiding Mira's eyes when she walked through the village. Some even nodded to her, grudging respect in their faces. The money piled up, more than Gregory had seen in years. He bought glass for the windows, nails to fix the barn, winter clothes for both of them. He brought home meat from the butcher and fresh bread from the baker, luxuries he had denied himself since buying the farm. And one evening, he brought home fabric, soft wool dyed deep blue and linen for shifts. "I thought you might want a proper dress," he said, setting the fabric on the table. He looked almost embarrassed. "For the harvest festival next month, if you want to go." Mira touched the wool, overwhelmed. She had not owned a dress in over a year. "You didn't have to do this." "I know. But you've worked hard and you deserve something nice." Gregory rubbed the back of his neck. "The festival is a big event. Dancing, food, music. I thought it might be good for you to go, meet people on better terms than working in their fields. Will you come with me, if you want me to?" "I do." Mira picked up the fabric, holding it against herself. "Thank you, Gregory." He nodded, still looking awkward, and retreated to tend the fire. But Mira saw the pleased flush on his neck and something warm settled in her chest. He had been thinking of her, planning for her comfort. Imagining a future where she danced at festivals instead of kneeling in poisoned earth. She made the dress over the next 2 weeks, sewing by lamplight after the day's work was done. Gregory watched sometimes, mending his own clothes or carving new handles for tools, their quiet companionship as comfortable as a worn blanket. He told her about the festivals from his childhood, how his sister Grace had loved to dance, how he had been a better dancer then, before the war taught him to move like a weapon instead of a partner. "I could relearn," he said, "if you wanted to dance with me." "I don't know the dances here," Mira admitted. "Orc celebrations are different, lots of drums and circle dances." "Then we'll both be learning. That's fair." The harvest festival took place in the village square, which had been swept and decorated with garlands of dried wheat and late-season flowers. Torches lit the evening, and tables groaned with food brought by every household. Roasted chickens and pork, breads and cheeses, pies made from the last of the autumn apples. A group of musicians tuned their instruments on a makeshift stage, fiddles and flutes and a drum. Mira wore her new blue dress and had braided her black hair with ribbons. She felt exposed and strange, dressed like a human woman but still obviously orc with her green skin and small tusks. Gregory wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard, looking almost civilized. He offered her his arm as they approached the square, and she took it. People stared. Of course they did. But the stares were curious rather than hostile, and several people actually greeted them. Hugh Carver raised a mug in salute. The widow whose orchard they had saved pressed a jar of preserves into Mira's hands. The young couple invited them to sit at their table. The evening unfolded in a warm blur. Mira ate food she hadn't tasted in years and drank cider that was just on the edge of turning hard. Gregory stayed close to her side, a solid presence that made her feel grounded. When the music started and people began to dance, he stood and offered his hand. "Ready to embarrass ourselves together?" he asked. Mira laughed and took his hand. "Absolutely." They were terrible dancers, both of them. Gregory had forgotten the steps and Mira had never known them. They fumbled through a reel, crashing into other couples and apologizing. But Gregory was laughing, real and unguarded, and Mira found herself laughing too. His hand was warm in hers, his other hand steady at her waist. He smelled of soap and wood smoke and the faint spice of the cider. When the reel ended and a slower song began, Gregory pulled her closer. "This one I remember," he murmured. "Just follow me." She did. They swayed together in the torchlight, closer than the dance strictly required. Mira rested her forehead against his shoulder and felt his breath hitch. His hand at her waist trembled slightly. She realized suddenly that he was as nervous as she was, this gruff man who faced down poison and prejudice without flinching but shook at the simple act of dancing close. "Gregory," she said softly, "I'm not going anywhere." He went very still. Then his arms tightened around her just for a moment before he forced himself to relax. "You can't know that. I know I don't want to. That's enough for now." They danced until the music ended, then walked home through the autumn night. The moon was high and bright, painting the fields silver. Their wheat rustled in the breeze, nearly ready for harvest. Everything they had built together, from poisoned ground to this abundance. At the door of the house, Gregory stopped. He turned to Mira, and in the moonlight his face was open in a way she had never seen. "I need to tell you something." "All right. I'm in love with you." The words came out blunt, almost helpless. "I think I have been since the day I bought you at that crossroads. You were shivering and defiant and so damned brave, and I looked at you and thought, that's what courage looks like. And every day since then, you've proven me right. You saved my farm, saved me really, and somewhere along the way I fell completely and probably stupidly in love with you." Mira's heart was a wild thing in her chest. "Why is it stupid?" "Because you're young and beautiful and clever, and I'm a broken-down soldier with a failing farm and a head full of ghosts. Because you could leave tomorrow and find someone better. Because everyone I've ever loved has left me, and I'm terrified you will too." She stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I'm not young, I'm 22. I'm not beautiful, I'm an orc woman with scars and calluses and a face that scares human children. And you're not broken down. You're strong and kind and honest, and you see me as a person instead of a curse." She reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble against her palm. "I love you too, Gregory Irons. I have for weeks, maybe longer, and I'm not leaving. Mira." Her name was a prayer. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper when she rose on her toes and kissed him back. His hands came up to frame her face, careful of her tusks, and she gripped his shirt to pull him closer. He tasted of cider and hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gregory rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I don't know how to be in love without being afraid. Then we'll figure it out together." Mira kissed him again, softer this time. "We're good at that, remember, fixing impossible things." They went inside and Gregory banked the fire while Mira lit a lamp. The house felt different now, charged with possibility. When Gregory climbed the ladder to help her into the loft, neither of them pretended he would climb back down. They lay together on her narrow mattress, fully clothed, his arm around her and her head on his chest. His heartbeat was steady under her ear, and she felt the tension slowly leave his body as he realized she wasn't going to disappear. "Stay," he murmured into her hair. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised again. They fell asleep like that, tangled together. Two people who had been called cursed learning that love was its own kind of blessing. The wheat harvest came in strong. Gregory and Mira worked side by side, cutting and bundling the golden stalks, their movements synchronized after months of shared labor. Neighbors came to help, as was the custom, and the fields rang with voices and laughter. It was the first harvest Gregory had been able to take in since buying the farm, and he kept stopping to just look at it, disbelief and joy warring on his face. They sold most of the grain and kept enough for seed and winter. The money was good, better than Gregory had dared hope. He paid off the last of the debts from buying the farm and set aside a sum for spring planting. And then, on a clear October morning, he asked Mira to walk with him into the village. "I need to buy something," he said, "and I want you to help me choose." The something turned out to be a ring. The village had a jeweler, an old man named Thomas who worked silver and set stones in a shop that smelled of metal and beeswax. Gregory led Mira inside and asked to see the rings. Thomas laid out a dozen on velvet cloth, simple bands and complex designs, silver and copper, and one delicate gold ring set with a tiny ruby. "What's this for?" Mira asked, though her heart had already guessed. "For you, if you'll have it." Gregory picked up a silver band, plain but well made, and turned it in his fingers. "I know we've only known each other 5 months. I know people will talk, a human and an orc, but I don't care about any of that. I just know that I want to spend my life with you. I want to work beside you and sleep beside you and build something that lasts." He looked at her, vulnerable and determined. "Mira Thorne, will you marry me?" She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded. Gregory's face split into a grin and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, cool and solid against her skin. "She said yes," Gregory told Thomas, who was beaming. "I can see that, boy. Congratulations to you both." They walked home hand in hand, Mira turning the ring on her finger and hardly believing it was real. "When?" she asked. "Whenever you want. Tomorrow or next spring or 10 years from now." "Spring," Mira decided. "After planting, before the crops need tending. I want to marry you in a field we healed together. Then spring it is." They told no one yet, keeping the secret close like a precious thing, but Mira wore the ring openly, and people noticed. Hugh Carver clapped Gregory on the back and called him a lucky man. The widow whose orchard they had saved knitted them a blanket as an early wedding gift. Even the village priest, a stern man who usually disapproved of mixed marriages, admitted that any union blessed by honest work and mutual devotion had God's approval. There was talk, of course. There always would be. Some people muttered about abominations and unnatural matches, but most of the valley had seen what Gregory and Mira accomplished together. They had turned dead land living, solved problems that had baffled farmers for years. They were proof that curses were superstition, and that two people working together could achieve small miracles. Winter came, and the farm buttoned itself up against the cold. Gregory had firewood stacked to the eaves and preserves lining the shelves. The root cellar was full of turnips and carrots and potatoes. They had smoked meat hanging in the barn and grain stored for the mule and chickens. It was more security than Gregory had known in years, and he told Mira so one night as they sat by the fire. "I used to lie awake every winter wondering if I'd starve before spring," he said. "Now I lie awake wondering what I did to deserve you." "You took my hand when no one else would," Mira said simply. "You saw a person instead of a curse. Best decision I ever made." They passed the winter in comfortable domesticity. Gregory taught Mira to carve wood, and she made a set of wooden spoons for the kitchen. Mira taught Gregory some of the orc songs from her childhood, and he hummed them while he worked. They read together by lamplight, Gregory having a surprising collection of books inherited from his mother. They made love in the loft while snow fell outside, learning each other's bodies with the same patience they brought to healing land, and they planned their wedding. It would be simple, just the two of them and the priest, vows spoken in the northwest field where they'd first found the poison and dug it out. Mira would wear her blue dress and a crown of wildflowers. Gregory would wear his best shirt and the silver ring he'd bought to match hers. They would speak promises that meant everything and needed no audience beyond the earth they'd saved together. But 2 weeks before the wedding, trouble came. It started with the cattle. Hugh Carver's prize bull died overnight, frothing at the mouth and convulsing. Then the widow's new apple saplings withered and blackened, all of them in a single night. A well in the eastern valley went foul, the water turning oily and rank. And everywhere, people whispered the same thing. The curse had returned. Gregory heard about it in the village when he went to buy seed for spring planting. He came home grim-faced, his jaw set hard. "They're blaming you," he said without preamble, "saying you never really broke the curse, just hid it for a while." Mira set down the bread dough she'd been kneading. "That's ridiculous. We found the poison sources, we cleaned them. The farms have been healthy for months. I know, but people need something to blame when bad things happen, and you're an easy target." Gregory slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. "Hugh Carver is talking about running you out of the valley. He's got half the farmers convinced you're the cause. What do you think?" Gregory looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "I think it's ignorant superstition and I won't let them touch you." But the situation worsened. More livestock died. More crops failed. Always in the eastern part of the valley, always sudden and inexplicable. A mob formed, angry farmers with torches and fear in their eyes. They marched to Gregory's farm 3 days before the wedding. Gregory met them at the property line, Mira at his side. There were perhaps 20 men, Hugh Carver at their head. Behind them stood women and children, watching with hungry eyes. "You need to leave, orc woman," Carver said. "We gave you a chance, but the curse is back. People are suffering, you have to go." "She's not going anywhere," Gregory said. His voice was cold as winter iron. "And there is no curse. This is something else, something natural. If you'd let us investigate instead of grabbing torches like fools, we could find the cause." "We know the cause," another man shouted. "It's her. Monsters bring bad luck, everyone knows it." Mira stepped forward. "I have investigated every farm problem in this valley for the last 4 months. Every single one was caused by contaminated water or poisoned soil, not curses. Let me look at the new problems. I'll find the source." "No," Carver said flatly. "You've had your chance. Now you leave, or we make you leave." Gregory moved in front of Mira, his body a wall between her and the mob. "You'll have to go through me." "Don't be a fool, Irons. She's not worth dying for. She's worth everything." Gregory's hand went to the knife at his belt. "And I've killed men for less than threatening the woman I love. Do you really want to test me?" The mob shifted uneasily. Gregory was a veteran, a soldier who had survived years of war. He looked at that moment like he could carve through all of them and not break a sweat. Several men took steps backward, but Hugh Carver stood his ground. "One man can't stop all of us. Be reasonable. Send her away and we'll leave you in peace. Marry a human woman, work your farm, live a normal life." "I don't want a normal life," Gregory said. "I want this one, with her." "Then you're a fool." Mira put her hand on Gregory's shoulder. "Wait." She stepped around him, facing the mob directly. "I'll make you a deal. Give me 3 days to find the cause of the new problems. If I can prove it's not a curse, you leave us alone. If I can't, I'll leave the valley and you'll never see me again." "Mira, no," Gregory said sharply. "It's the only way." She looked at Carver. 3 days, that's all I ask." Carver conferred with the other men in low voices. Finally, he nodded. 3 days, but if you fail, you go." No arguments, no delays. Agreed. The mob dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Gregory stood rigid until the last of them had disappeared down the road. Then he turned on Mira, his face a mask of fury and fear. "What were you thinking? You can't promise to leave." "I won't have to." Mira's voice was calmer than she felt. "Because I'm going to find the source. There's a pattern here, Gregory. All the problems are in the Eastern Valley. That's not random. What if you can't find it in time? Then I'll break my promise and stay anyway." She took his hands. "I'm not leaving you. Not for a mob, not for a curse, not for anything. But if I can solve this, we'll finally be free of the suspicion. We can marry and live in peace." Gregory pulled her close, pressing his face into her hair. "I'm terrified of losing you. You won't, I promise." They started investigating immediately. Mira mapped the Eastern Valley, marking every farm that had experienced new problems. Gregory questioned neighbors, gathering details about the timing and nature of each incident. They worked through the night by lamplight, comparing notes. "It's all within a mile of the old mill," Mira said, pointing to the map. "The one that burned down last year. What would the mill have to do with livestock and crops? I don't know yet, but we're going there tomorrow." The old mill sat on the eastern edge of the valley, a blackened ruin beside a fast-running stream. The fire had been put down to an accident, a lantern kicked over by the miller who died in the blaze. The shell of the building stood skeletal against the sky, timbers charred and roof collapsed. Mira and Gregory picked through the ruins carefully. Most of the structure was ash and nails, nothing salvageable. But in the back corner, beneath fallen beams, Mira found something that made her blood run cold. Ceramic jugs. Dozens of them, shattered by the heat of the fire but still recognizable. And beneath them, a trapdoor leading to a cellar. Gregory pried up the trapdoor and they climbed down into darkness. Gregory lit a torch and the light revealed a nightmare. The cellar was packed floor to ceiling with jugs and casks, hundreds of them. Many had cracked in the fire's heat, their contents leaked out and pooling on the stone floor. The smell was the same nauseating chemical stench they'd found on Gregory's farm, but magnified 100-fold. "Gods," Gregory breathed. The miller was storing poison here, all of it. And when the mill burned, the heat cracked the containers. The poison is leaching into the stream. Mira traced the flow of water in her mind. The stream feeds the eastern valley. Everyone downstream is drinking contaminated water, using it for their crops and animals. Why would the miller have so much poison? Maybe he was paid to store it, or maybe he was selling it for tanning or dyeing. Doesn't matter now. What matters is stopping it. They climbed out of the cellar and followed the stream. 100 yards downstream, where the water pooled in a slow eddy, the contamination was visible. An oily sheen on the surface, dead fish floating belly up. Every farm drawing water from here would be affected. We need to block the stream, Mira said. Dam it above the mill so the poison stops flowing, and then clean out the cellar before more can leak. That's days of work, and we have less than 2 days left. Then we'd better work fast. They ran back to the farm and loaded the wagon with every tool they owned. Then they drove through the valley, stopping at every farm to explain what they'd found. Some people believed them. Others were skeptical. But when Mira showed them the oily water and the dead fish, when Gregory described the cellar full of cracked poison jugs, the evidence was undeniable. Hugh Carver listened with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Finally, he spat into the dirt. "If you're lying, orc woman, I'll drive you out myself." "I'm not lying. Help us fix this and you'll see." By midday, a dozen farmers had joined them at the mill. They built a dam of stones and earth above the contamination point, diverting the stream away from the poisoned ground. It was brutal work, hauling rocks and packing earth, but with so many hands it went quickly. By nightfall, the clean water was flowing freely while the contaminated section sat isolated, slowly draining into the ground where it could do no more harm. The next day, they tackled the cellar. Men formed a chain, passing jugs and casks up from below to be hauled away and destroyed on rocky ground far from any water source. Mira directed the operation, identifying which containers were cracked and leaking, which could be safely moved intact. Gregory worked beside the other men, his veteran strength and endurance earning grudging respect. By sunset of the second day, the cellar was empty and the stream running clear. They tested the water downstream. No oily sheen, no chemical smell. The poison was contained, the source eliminated. It would take time for the land to fully heal, but the immediate danger was past. The farmers stood around in exhausted silence, looking at what they'd accomplished. Hugh Carver walked over to where Mira sat on a fallen log, her hands blistered and her clothes filthy. "I owe you an apology," he said gruffly. "You were right. It wasn't a curse, just poison from a dead man's greed." "I don't need an apology," Mira said. "I just need you to stop blaming bad luck on convenient targets." "Fair enough." Carver held out his hand. After a moment, Mira took it. His grip was firm, respectful. "You're welcome in this valley, Mira Thorne. You and Gregory both." One by one, the other farmers came over. Some shook her hand. Some just nodded. The widow brought a skin of water and insisted Mira drink. A young farmer named Peter apologized for joining the mob. It was not absolution, not entirely. But it was acknowledgement, and that was a start. Gregory found Mira as the sun set and pulled her to her feet. "Come on, we have a wedding to prepare for." They were married 3 days later in the northwest field, exactly as planned. The wheat was just beginning to sprout, tiny green shoots pushing up through dark earth. Mira wore her blue dress and a crown of early wildflowers. Gregory wore his best shirt and boots polished to a shine. The priest spoke the words and they spoke their vows. "I promise to stay," Mira said, her voice clear and strong. "Through good fortune and bad, through easy times and hard. I promise to see you as you are, not as you fear you might be. I promise to build something lasting with you. Here in this earth we healed together." Gregory's voice was rough with emotion. "I promise to trust that you won't leave, to believe I'm not cursed and neither are you, to work beside you and love you and never take for granted what we've built. I promise to be the man you see when you look at me, the one who deserves you." They exchanged rings and kissed while the priest blessed them and the field around them. No audience watched except the birds and the wind and the new wheat promising abundance. It was perfect. They held a small celebration at the farm that evening. Hugh Carver came, and the widow, and Peter and his wife. The neighbors who had helped clean the mill, the people who had seen Mira and Gregory work miracles with nothing but determination and dirty hands. They ate roasted chicken and fresh bread, drank cider and told stories. When someone asked about the honeymoon, Gregory and Mira just laughed. "We'll honeymoon right here," Gregory said. "We have a farm to run." But that night, alone in their house with the fire burning low and the stars bright outside, they held each other close and marveled at what they had built. Not just a restored farm or a solved mystery, but a life, a partnership, a love that had grown from chains and curses into something unshakable. "No regrets," Gregory murmured into Mira's hair. She thought of the question and decided she hated it. Too easy, too trite. "Better question," she said. "What are you most grateful for?" Gregory was quiet for a moment, considering. "That you were standing on that auction block, that the trader was honest enough to warn people about your supposed curse, that I was fool enough to think I could understand you because I was cursed too." He kissed her forehead. "That you took my hand." "I'm grateful you offered it," Mira said. "I'm grateful you saw me as a person when everyone else saw a problem. I'm grateful for hard work that led somewhere good. I'm grateful for this." She gestured at the house, the farm, the life they'd carved from poisoned ground and stubborn hope. "So am I." Gregory tightened his arms around her. "So am I." Spring turned to summer and the farm thrived. The wheat grew tall and golden, the barley thick and healthy. The vegetable garden produced more than they could eat, so they traded the surplus for goods they needed. The chickens laid eggs in abundance. The mule, now sleek and well-fed, pulled the plow without complaint. Everything they touched seemed blessed, though they both knew it was not blessing but simply the reward of honest labor and healed land. Mira's reputation in the valley grew. Farmers sought her advice on crop rotation and soil health. She taught them how to test for contamination, how to build proper compost, how to read the land's needs. Gregory was in demand as well, his veteran's discipline and problem-solving skills valuable to a community learning to question its assumptions. Together, they became something neither had been alone. Respected, trusted, integral parts of the valley's life. Hugh Carver hired them to survey his entire property, and they found 2 more buried caches of contaminated materials. The widow asked Mira to help her establish a new orchard, and they chose varieties suited to the soil and climate, planted them with proper spacing and care. Young Peter wanted to learn water management, so Gregory spent weeks teaching him how to divert streams and build irrigation channels. The work was steady and satisfying, but more than that, it was proof. Proof that curses were ignorance waiting to be enlightened. Proof that 2 people labeled as cursed could build a life that blessed everyone around them. In late summer, Mira realized she was pregnant. She told Gregory on an evening when the sunset painted the fields gold and crimson. They were sitting on the porch, as had become their habit, watching the day end in comfortable silence. Mira took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "There's going to be 3 of us soon," she said quietly. Gregory went very still. His hand pressed gently against her stomach and his eyes went wide. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be. I've missed my courses twice and I'm sick every morning. My grandmother said that's how it starts. A baby. Gregory's voice was full of wonder and terror in equal measure. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? I'm terrified. He laughed shakily. But yes, I'm happy. So happy I can barely breathe. You're going to be a mother. I'm going to be a father. There's going to be a child in this house who never knows what it's like to be called cursed. Or they might, Mira said honestly. Half-orc children aren't always accepted. Then we'll teach them to stand tall anyway, like their mother. Gregory pulled her close and kissed her temple. We'll love them so fiercely that no one else's opinion matters. And if anyone gives them trouble, I'll explain the error of their thinking. With your fists, only if necessary. Mira laughed and leaned into his warmth. The future suddenly felt very real, very present. A child who would grow up on this farm they'd healed together. A child who would learn the value of hard work and the foolishness of superstition. A child who would be proof that love built bridges stronger than any prejudice. The pregnancy was easier than Mira had feared. She worked through most of it, only stopping in the last months when her belly made bending to tend crops difficult. Gregory hovered anxiously, convinced something would go wrong, because surely his curse couldn't be broken so thoroughly. Mira bore his worrying with patience, understanding the ghosts he was fighting. Nothing bad is going to happen, she told him repeatedly. We're not cursed, remember? We proved that. I know, but logic doesn't always reach the scared places. Then I'll keep reminding you until it does. The baby came in early spring, just as the fields were being planted. Mira labored through a day and a night with the widow attending her as midwife and Gregory pacing holes in the floor downstairs. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and healthy, the widow called Gregory up to the loft. You have a son, she said, placing the bundled infant in Gregory's arms. Gregory looked down at the tiny face, the shock of dark hair, the small tusks just visible in the baby's open mouth. His son. His and Mira's. The child's skin was a pale green, lighter than Mira's, and his ears were only slightly pointed. He was perfect. Hello, Yale, Gregory whispered, the name they'd chosen weeks ago. Welcome home. Mira, exhausted and radiant, held out her arms. Gregory placed the baby in them carefully, as if handling the most precious thing in the world, which he realized he was. He's beautiful, Mira said, tears streaming down her face. He's perfect and beautiful and ours. No curse, Gregory said, almost to himself. He's healthy and whole. No curse. No curse, Mira agreed. Just a family. Yale grew quickly, a robust baby who smiled easily and cried rarely. He had his mother's green skin and his father's gray eyes, a striking combination that drew stares in the village but also smiles. Children were precious in the valley, and a healthy baby was cause for celebration regardless of his mixed heritage. Hugh Carver gave them a cradle carved from oak. The widow knitted blankets and caps. Peter's wife organized a meal chain, different families bringing food each day for a week so Mira could rest and recover. The priest blessed Yale at the church, and if some people in the congregation looked uncomfortable, many more welcomed the child with genuine warmth. Gregory was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Yale when he fussed. He sang the lullabies Mira had taught him, old orc songs in a language he didn't understand but had learned phonetically. He built toys from scrap wood, a rattle and a teething ring and a mobile to hang above the cradle. He worried constantly and loved fiercely, and Mira watched him bloom into fatherhood with quiet joy. You're good at this, she told him one night as he rocked Yale to sleep. I'm terrified every moment that I'll do something wrong. That means you care. That's what makes you good at it. Yale's first year passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small miracles. his first smile, his first laugh. The first time he reached for Gregory and said something that might have been "Papa." The first time he pulled himself up on the furniture and stood wobbling on unsteady legs. Each milestone was a victory, proof that they were building something that would outlast them. The farm continued to thrive. They brought in their best wheat harvest yet, grain so golden and heavy-headed that Gregory sold it for premium prices. The barley went to the village brewer, who declared it the finest he'd worked with in years. The vegetable garden fed them and half the valley, Mira sharing the surplus with neighbors who had helped them in hard times. Money ceased to be the desperate worry it had been. Gregory bought better tools, improved the barn, replaced the wagon with a sturdier model. Mira bought books and fabric, seeds for exotic herbs, treats from the traveling merchants. They saved for Yale's future, imagining school fees and apprenticeships and whatever else he might need. But more than the material prosperity, they had peace. The whispers about curses had faded to nothing, replaced by respect and acceptance. Mira was known as the woman who understood land and water, the one to call when crops failed or wells fouled. Gregory was the steady, reliable man who kept his word and fixed problems with methodical intelligence. Together they were a fixture of the valley, as much a part of the landscape as the fields and forests. On their second wedding anniversary, Gregory surprised Mira with a gift. He led her out to the northwest field, the one where they'd first found the poison and later spoken their vows. A young oak tree had been planted there, barely taller than Gregory but already strong and healthy. "I planted it last fall," Gregory said. "I wanted something that would last longer than us, something Yale could show his children and grandchildren." The tree that grew where his parents healed the land and proved curses were lies. Mira touched the rough bark, overwhelmed. "It's perfect. So are you." Gregory wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I love you, Mira Irons. I loved you when I bought you at that crossroads, though I didn't have the words for it then. I love you for seeing past my fear and ghosts. I love you for being strong enough to stay when leaving would have been easier. I love you for giving me Yale and this life and reasons to hope. I love you for seeing me as a person when everyone else saw a problem," Mira said. "For taking my hand when you had no reason to trust me. For working beside me to build something beautiful from poisoned ground. For being brave enough to believe we weren't cursed." They stood together in the spring sunshine, their son babbling happily in the sling on Mira's back, the fields green and abundant around them. The oak tree would grow tall here, its roots sinking deep into healed earth. It would outlive them all, a living testament to what two people could accomplish with stubbornness and love and the willingness to dig deep until they found truth. The trader had warned that she came with a curse. The man had answered that he did too. And in taking her hand, in choosing partnership over fear, they had broken both curses that never truly existed. They had proven that luck was what you made of it, that hard work mattered more than superstition, and that love planted in good soil would always grow strong. Years later, when Yale was old enough to ask about how his parents met, Mira would tell him the story. About the crossroads and the chains, the trader's warning and his father's response. About the farm that was dying and the poison they found buried deep. About the mob in the mill and the cellar full of cracked jugs. About proving again and again that curses were lies people told when they didn't understand the world. And Yale would listen wide-eyed and ask if they were scared. Mira would look at Gregory, and they would smile at each other with the quiet understanding of people who had been through fire together. "We were terrified," Gregory would say, "but we were together, and that made all the difference." The sun set over the valley, painting the fields gold and crimson. Gregory and Mira walked home through their abundant wheat, their son between them holding both their hands. Behind them, the oak tree stood sentinel, growing slowly but steadily toward the sky. And ahead of them, the small house with its smoking chimney promised warmth and rest, and all the ordinary miracles of a life built on truth instead of fear. They had been called cursed, both of them. They had been cast out and looked down on, feared and pitied and blamed. But they had taken each other's hands and chosen a different story. They had dug deep, worked hard, and refused to believe in curses when there was truth to be found. And in the end, the only thing that followed them was luck. The kind you earned with bleeding hands and stubborn hope. The kind that looked like love, built like a home, and lasted like the oak tree's slow, steady reaching toward the light.